On the morning of May 15, 2026, a mathematics teacher named Michael Oyedokun went to work at Community Grammar School in Ahoro Esiele, Oriire local government area, Oyo State. He had done it hundreds of times before. He had no reason to believe that day would be different. Armed men arrived on motorcycles. They fired shots to scatter the adults. They walked into the classrooms. They took the children. Michael Oyedokun did not come home from work that day. He was taken with the children. And a few weeks later, a video appeared on social media showing him being killed in front of a camera in a forest far from the chalk and the blackboard he had spent his life working with. On July 10, 2026, 56 days after that morning, the presidency of Nigeria announced that all the surviving victims of Oriire mass abduction had been rescued by Nigerian security forces. The children are home. The teachers are free. 8 kidnappers are in DSS custody, and several others were neutralized during the operation. This is a moment for Nigeria to celebrate. The children are alive. That matters above everything else. But here is what celebration without analysis would cost us. Michael Oyedokun is still dead. Another teacher died in captivity before the rescue. The men who planned this operation are still being identified. The forest reserve where Nigeria's children were held for 56 days is still there. And the security architecture that allowed this to happen in the first place, in the southwest, in Oyo State, in a region Nigeria thought was safe, has not fundamentally changed. This video is going to give the rescue the celebration it deserves. And then it is going to ask the questions that the celebration cannot be allowed to erase. Because Nigeria has celebrated before, and the children keep getting taken. If you are new to Pulse Nigeria HQ, this channel exists to give Nigerians the kind of honest analysis that goes beyond the government's press releases. Subscribe now and stay with me because this video honors the survivors and refuses to forget the questions.
What happened on May 15th and what the 56 days looked like? Let me take you through everything that happened from the morning of May 15th to the evening of July 10th, because the full story is more detailed, more human, and more important than any single headline captured. On the morning of May 15, 2026, heavily armed gunmen riding motorcycles launched a coordinated simultaneous attack on 3 schools in the Isiele and Yawata communities of Oriire local government area. The 3 schools were Community Grammar School in Ahoro Isiele, Baptist Nursery and Primary School in Yawata, and LA Primary School in Ahoro Isiele. The attack hit all 3 schools at the same time. That coordination tells you this was not opportunistic crime. This was planned, rehearsed, and executed by people who had studied these schools in advance. The abductees included 39 students and several teachers, with the Christian Association of Nigeria in Oyo State putting the total at 46 persons. The youngest victim was a toddler. The oldest were teachers who had spent their careers in those classrooms. One teacher was killed during the assault itself. Michael Oyedokun, the mathematics teacher, was taken alive with the children. In the days that followed, the government sent delegations. The federal government's delegation, led by Chief of Staff Femi Gbajabiamila, alongside the National Security Advisor and the Defense Minister, visited the community. They brought rice and cash. The women of Yawata stood in front of the officials and said 4 words that every Nigerian needs to remember. We do not want money. They wanted their children. The kidnappers issued demands. They wanted a ransom. They wanted the release of a named kingpin who is currently being prosecuted for other atrocities, and according to some reports, they made demands about the implementation of Sharia law in Oyo State, a demand that the abducted school principal herself disputed from captivity. In early June, a video emerged on social media. It showed Michael Oyedokun being killed in captivity. The video went viral. It generated national outrage and it accelerated the political pressure on the government to resolve the crisis by any means necessary. The Nigerian Union of Teachers declared an indefinite strike effective June 1. Public schools across Oyo State shut down. West African senior school certificate examinations were disrupted. Governor Seyi Makinde condemned the abduction and said it reflected a shift in the country's security dynamics. The rescue operation, when it came, was not a single dramatic raid. According to the Nigerian Army's official statement, it was an intelligence-led campaign that lasted for more than a month. The operation was coordinated by Major General C.R. Nebeife, the General Officer commanding 2 Division of the Nigerian Army based in Ibadan. It drew on personnel from the Office of the National Security Advisor, the National Counter-Terrorism Center, Special Forces from the Army, Navy and Air Force, the Nigerian Police Force, the Department of State Services, the National Intelligence Agency, the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, local vigilantes and hunters, and the Amotekun Corps. The security agencies focused on mapping the kidnappers' network of informants, identifying their hideouts and logistics inside the Old Oyo National Park Forest Reserve, and dismantling the criminal structure before moving on the captives directly. Multiple arrests were carried out in Oyo and other states across the country, which the Army said disorganized the group's command structure. On July 10, 2026, the operation reached its conclusion. 44 victims were rescued alive. 8 kidnappers were arrested and placed in DSS custody. Several others were killed during the operation. The presidency confirmed there was no quid pro quo. The kingpin, whose release had been demanded, remains in custody and being prosecuted. No ransom was paid. Rachel Folawe Alamu, the principal of Community High School Isiele, who was among the kidnapped and who was present in the video from captivity disputing the Sharia demand, was among those rescued. In a video shared by the presidency's spokesperson, she thanked President Tinubu and the security agencies for securing her release. Governor Seyi Makinde said, "It is such a big relief for all of us. Right now, I am overjoyed and can hardly say much."
Honoring Michael Oyedokun and the second teacher who died in captivity. Before we go any further, I need to spend time on the 2 people who did not come home on July 10, because no celebration of this rescue is complete or honest without looking directly at them. Michael Oyedokun was a mathematics teacher. He went to work on the morning of May 15. He was taken with his students. He was killed in captivity in a video that was shared across Nigerian social media in early June. He did not survive to see the rescue of the children he was taken with. A second teacher also died in captivity before the July 10 rescue. Premium Times confirmed this in their reporting. This teacher's name has not been widely published as of this recording, but this was a person who survived the initial attack, endured weeks in a forest prison, and died before help arrived. Michael Oyedokun went to work as a teacher. He died as a teacher. He did not leave his students. He was killed because he was with them and because the Nigerian state could not reach him in time. The rescue of 44 survivors is a genuine achievement of Nigerian security forces working across multiple agencies over more than a month. But 44 survivors and 2 deaths is not a clean victory. It is a partial rescue of a situation that should never have happened. And the 2 people who died deserve to be named, honored, and remembered in every conversation about what this operation achieved. That is why this video is not titled simply, "The Oyo Children Are Rescued." It is titled, "The Oyo Children Are Home, 56 days, 2 teachers dead, and the questions Nigeria still cannot answer." The 2 teachers are part of this story. They always will be.
What this operation reveals about Nigeria's security capacity. Now, let us examine what this rescue operation actually tells us about the state of Nigerian security, because it reveals both genuine capability and genuine institutional failure simultaneously. The capability is real. A multi-agency operation involving the Army, Navy, Air Force, Police, DSS, NIA, NSCDC, Amotekun,
and local vigilantes worked together over more than a month to identify a criminal network, map their logistics, dismantle their informant structure, and rescue 44 people from a forest reserve. That is not nothing. That is sophisticated, patient, intelligence-led security work of the kind that Nigeria has struggled to demonstrate consistently. The coordination between federal agencies and local knowledge, specifically the inclusion of local vigilantes, hunters, and Amotekun alongside the formal military and intelligence structure, is the operational model that security experts have been recommending for years. Local people know local terrain. The army knows how to fight. And when those two things work together under proper command, you get July 10. When they operate in silos, you get the delays and failures that have defined the response to school kidnappings since 2014. The forest that nobody is talking about. Here is the geographical detail that most Nigerian media coverage of this rescue has completely missed. The victims were held inside the Old Oyo National Park Forest Reserve. That forest reserve links directly to Kainji National Park, and according to Premium Times, a Boko Haram franchise group led by a commander named Sadiku recently migrated into the Kainji National Park area. The kidnappers who took the Oriire children were not random local criminals. They were operating in a forest corridor that is actively being used by groups with connections to jihadist networks that Nigeria has been fighting since 2014. The abduction of children from Oyo State was not simply banditry that migrated south. It was an operation conducted in terrain that overlaps with a known extremist movement corridor. That changes everything about how we should understand the security challenge facing Oyo State and the broader Southwest. The institutional failure is equally real. 56 days. The children were in a forest reserve in Oyo State, a state that is home to 2 divisions of the Nigerian Army, one of the most established military formations in the country. The forest where they were held is within Nigeria's national park system, which is administered by a federal government agency. The National Counter-Terrorism Center, which is a federal government body, was part of the rescue operation from the beginning. So here is the question that the celebration cannot be allowed to close. If the Nigerian Army, the DSS, the NIA, the police, the NSCDC, and the National Counter-Terrorism Center were all involved in this operation, and if those agencies are all permanently operational, why did it take 56 days to find 44 people in a national park in Oyo State? The answer that the Army's own statement points toward is intelligence. The operation lasted more than a month because it was designed to map the network before moving on the captives. A premature raid risked the kidnappers killing the victims before rescue could be secured. That is a genuine operational constraint, and the Army deserves credit for the patience of that approach. But there is a second answer that the Army's statement does not address. The kidnappers had informants. The Army said explicitly that the operation focused on identifying the terrorists' informants and dismantling their logistics. Informants are local people, people who live in communities near the forest reserve, people who knew the kidnappers were operating there and chose not to report it or were actively helping them. That informant network does not disappear with the rescue of 44 people. It remains inside the communities of Oriire and surrounding areas, and until it is fully identified and dismantled, the security vulnerability that produced May 15 still exists. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you follow this story from the beginning? And do you think the government did everything it could to bring those children home faster? I want every honest answer before we get to the section that connects this story to the biggest security reform Nigeria has ever attempted.
How the Oriire attack changed Nigerian politics and what comes next. Earlier this year, Pulse Nigeria HQ did a full analysis of the state police bill that the Nigerian Senate passed on June 25. I want to revisit that analysis now because the Oriire rescue gives us new information about whether state police is the answer to what happened on May 15. The Oriire attack was the single most politically consequential event in the state police debate. Before May 15, the Southwest had been the loudest voice against the urgency of state police reform,
partly because the Southwest had Amotekun, which was providing a degree of community security that the North did not have. After May 15, that argument collapsed. If Oyo State with Amotekun could lose 39 children and several teachers from 3 schools in broad daylight, then no state could claim its existing security architecture was sufficient. The Senate passed the State Police Bill 10 days after the Oriire attack. Every single senator voted for it. Every state governor and every state speaker endorsed it within 24 hours. The political connection between the Oriire attack and the speed of the State Police Bill's passage is not circumstantial, it is causal. What the rescue operation tells us about the state police argument. Here is the analysis that connects the rescue to the state police debate in a way that most commentators have missed. The rescue operation that freed the Oriire victims succeeded because of a combination of federal military capacity, intelligence agency sophistication, and local knowledge from Amotekun, vigilantes, and hunters. None of those 3 elements alone was sufficient. All 3 together produced the result. State police, as designed in the bill passed by the Senate, would add a 4th element, a permanent, locally commanded, constitutionally authorized police force with community-level intelligence networks and faster response times than the federal police can provide. If state police had existed in Oyo State with proper community intelligence networks, the question is not whether the rescue would have happened. The question is whether the kidnapping would have been possible in the first place. Informant networks inside the community would have been harder to build without detection. The movement of 40 to 50 armed men on motorcycles toward 3 schools simultaneously might have been picked up by community-level intelligence before they arrived. But the rescue also exposes the limitation of the state police argument. The kidnappers used a forest reserve that crosses state lines between Oyo and other states, with connections to a national park where a Boko Haram franchise is operating. State police is by definition limited to state boundaries. A criminal network that operates across state lines, that uses federal forest reserves as operational terrain, and that has connections to national extremist groups cannot be countered by state police alone. It requires exactly the kind of federal multi-agency operation that rescued the Oriire victims. The lesson of this operation is not that we need state police instead of federal security, it is that we need both working together with proper community intelligence at the base. That is the security architecture that worked on July 10, and it is the architecture that Nigeria needs to build permanently rather than assembling crisis by crisis every time children are taken.
5 questions that the celebration cannot be allowed to close in. Here are the 5 questions that every Nigerian, and specifically every Oyo State parent, has the right to demand answers to in the weeks and months ahead. Question 1. Who are the 8 kidnappers in DSS custody and what network do they belong to? The Army said the operation dismantled the informant network and logistics chain of the group, but dismantling a network requires knowing who is in it. The Nigerian public deserves a public account of who organized this attack, what group they belong to, and what their connection is to the Sadiku-led Boko Haram franchise now operating in the Kainji National Park area. Question 2. How did armed men plan and execute a coordinated attack on 3 schools in a local government area without any intelligence agency detecting the preparation? School kidnappings require reconnaissance. The kidnappers needed to know the school timetables, the staff presence, the escape routes, and the forest paths. That reconnaissance took time. Nobody reported it. Nobody stopped it. How? Question 3. What happened to the rehabilitation of the survivors? 44 children and teachers spent 56 days in a forest in the hands of armed criminals. The youngest was 2 years old. These are not people who need a press release and a photograph with a government official. They need trauma counseling, medical assessment, educational support, and sustained psychological care. What specific program has been committed to for the survivors of the Oriire abduction? Question 4. What is happening in the Old Oyo National Park and the Kainji National Park corridor? If a Boko Haram franchise has migrated into the Kainji National Park area and is using the forest corridor that links to Old Oyo National Park as operational terrain, that is a security emergency for Oyo, Kwara, and Niger State simultaneously. What is the federal government's strategy for that corridor beyond the single operation that rescued the Oriire victims? The question only Pulse Nigeria HQ is asking. Here is the question that has received no attention whatsoever in the coverage of this rescue. A toddler was among the abducted, not a school-age child, a toddler. That means one of the adults taken from those schools had a toddler with them that day, a teacher who brought a child to work, or a parent who had come to the school for another reason. This detail, confirmed by Kan in Oyo State, tells you something important about what May 15 was actually like in that community. It was not a military operation against a school. It was an attack on a normal morning in a community where adults brought their smallest children with them to the places they worked and gathered. A toddler was held in a forest for 56 days. That toddler is now home. But the image of a toddler in that forest, which no camera captured and no statement has fully addressed, is the most human measure of what this attack actually was.
What Nigeria must do now that the children are home? The children are home. That is the most important sentence in this entire video. And now that they are home, here is what must happen next. First, the survivors must receive comprehensive and sustained rehabilitation. Not a hospital visit and a press statement. A dedicated, funded, multi-year program of medical care, trauma counseling, educational catch-up support, and economic assistance for the affected families. The government record on post-rescue rehabilitation for kidnapping survivors in Nigeria is poor. The Chibok girls who were relieved after 2016 received some attention. But the hundreds of other survivors of school kidnappings across Nigeria have largely been released into communities without adequate support. Oriire must be different. Second, the informant network must be fully dismantled. The army said they identified and dismantled the network. 8 arrests have been made, but the informants who provided local support for the kidnappers are part of the same communities where the survivors must now return to school and live. If those informants are not identified, arrested, and prosecuted, the survivors return to a community where the people who enabled their kidnapping are still walking free. Third, the forest corridor security strategy must be made public. The Old Oyo National Park to Kainji National Park corridor is now a documented operational terrain for criminal and extremist groups. The Nigerian state needs to present a public plan for how it will secure that corridor beyond the single rescue operation. That plan should involve the Oyo, Kwara, and Niger state governments, the federal military, and the communities along the corridor who live in the shadow of this threat every day. Fourth, the state police enabling law process must be transparent. The Senate passed the State Police Bill. The constitutional amendment process is underway. But the enabling laws that each state must pass to actually establish its state police force will determine everything about whether state police protects communities or becomes a political weapon. Oyo State's enabling law, when it comes, should specifically address the community intelligence gap that allowed the Oriire attack to be planned without detection. Fifth, the teachers of Nigeria deserve a formal national security commitment. The Nigerian Union of Teachers went on strike after Oriire. They returned to school after the rescue was announced, but teachers across this country, in Borno, in Zamfara, in Plateau, and in Oyo, are going to work every day in an environment where they know that what happened to Michael Oyedokun can happen to them. The Nigerian state owes its teachers a specific,
funded verifiable commitment to their physical safety, not a speech, a plan.
The children of Oriire are home. Let that sentence be said first, clearly and with genuine gratitude for the security forces who spent more than a month in a forest to bring them back. Michael Oyedokun went to work as a teacher and did not come home. A second teacher died in captivity before the rescue. Their names must be spoken alongside the celebration. And the questions must be asked now, while the emotion of this rescue is still present, while the public is still paying attention, and while the government is still in the position of having to respond, because the pattern in Nigeria is that the questions come later, when attention has moved elsewhere, when the political incentive to answer has passed, and when the next group of children has already been taken. Nigeria has now experienced major school kidnappings in Borno, Zamfara, Niger, Kaduna, Kebbi, and Oyo. The children keep getting taken, the rescues keep getting celebrated, and the security architecture that allows the next taking to happen keeps being left in place. The children of Oriire are home. Make sure the questions that bring every other child home too are not forgotten in the celebration. If this analysis gave you the full picture of what the Oriire rescue means for Nigeria, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Like this video, subscribe to Pulse Nigeria HQ, and tell me in the comments what should happen to the communities where the kidnappers' informants lived. I will see you in the next one.